interesting take here from Emmanuel Acho. You know Emmanuel Acho.
Yeah.
He actually, I actually like some of his takes about Purdy, but this is his take. He's kind of sounding off on Kyle Shanahan for the Wilks firing.
Kyle Shanahan got me heated. Come here, fam. Shanahan, you wasted a season. You hired a defensive coordinator in Steve Wilks, who you never believed in the first place. Go back to the Minnesota Vikings game in the middle of the season, early in the season. Steve Wilks runs an all-out blitz. Shanahan, he berates him at the end of the game in the post-game press conference. But in 2017, when Wilks was a coordinator for the Carolina Panthers, the defensive coordinator, and they had a top-flight defense, he blitzed 47% of the time. So blitzing is what Steve Wilks does. If you didn't want Wilks to blitz, why'd you hire him? Then Super Bowl, biggest stage, everybody watching in the biggest moment. You call a timeout to question Steve Wilks. You never believed in the dude in the first place. Now you're going to fire him. Now your Niners defensive players are going on their fourth defensive coordinator in 5 seasons. Saleh, D'Amico, Wilks, question mark. Shanahan, you got to know what you're doing before you do it. You can't just be hiring dudes all willy-nilly when you got all pros all over the defense. You're wasting their careers. Hire somebody that you believe in and go get the job done.
So that was Emmanuel Acho. I'll leave my take out of it for now. But what do you think about the Steve Wilks firing? And do you think it was a mistake to bring Wilks in even in the first place?
Well, it's interesting. They asked Wilks, usually if you go hire a defensive coordinator, you take on the staff that he has sometimes, and a lot of times definitely the scheme that he runs. Well, the Niners didn't do that. The Niners said, we have an opening, and you run our scheme, and you work with our staff, and you adjust to us. We don't adjust to you. And Steve got there early and watched all the film and felt like he could make the adjustment. They obviously felt like he could make the adjustment. I hear what Acho's saying, but you blitz. I mean, blitzing doesn't have to be your. I would imagine if you ask Steve Wilks, he would tell you that he blitzed because of something to do with the personnel that he had. I mean, you show me a coach that doesn't play to his personnel, and I'll show you a pretty average coach. So you're telling me that Steve Wilks came in blitzing 47% and that he just had to blitz that many more, that percentage of the time? No, he didn't. And to me, it's like you always adjust to your personnel. The 49ers game plan has been to rush 4, drop 7, and make teams, get to the quarterback with just their front 4. That's why they went and got Hargrave. That's why they drafted Nick Bosa, right? That's why they're putting all these resources in their defensive line, because they're trying to dictate the outcomes by rushing 4 and dropping 7. So there you have it. I mean, I don't know that Shanahan's, the bottom line was it fair to Wilks to bring him in and say, don't run your own scheme, run our scheme, and then if you don't run our scheme well, you're out? Was that fair? Maybe not. But then I think you got to decide, it's been back-to-back years there where you lost Saleh and D'Amico. It's like, do you have a somebody else in mind? Do you have somebody else in play? And as far as he got mad at Steve Wilks in the Minnesota game, Steve Wilks called an all-out blitz on the final play of the first half against the Vikings and gave up a touchdown in the process. So that was not a good call. I don't care if it's Sam Acho, Emmanuel Acho, or Johnny Acho. I really don't care who's making the comment. I mean, that was a bad call. So he deserved to be called out on a zero blitz when the only thing that they could do, only way they could score was if you went all out blitz. And you did, and they did, and you lost. I mean, there was a reason he got called out there. That was bad. Now it's all on Shanahan because he's the head coach and this is his staff. So if he hired the wrong defensive coordinator, it's on him. Even if it was on Wilks in the Super Bowl, and I'm not saying it was, because the Niners held Mahomes and company down in the first half of that game. But even if that final drive in overtime was Wilks' fault, still, I mean, it's like you hired him. It's your hand-picked defensive coordinator. So it all falls on you anyway. So it's not like you can say, well, it falls on Wilks but not Shanahan. Wilks is Shanahan. Wilks was picked by Shanahan. So there's no getting around Shanahan's culpability here. Everybody knows it's on Kyle for sure. The question is, is he scapegoating Wilks? Is Wilks being scapegoated? Or is there legitimate problems with the way he called the game? And I just think that, you're going to have to go get somebody who's clearly better, because Steve Wilks is a veteran. He's been around. You can't just go with some Daniel Bullocks. Hey, we're going with a first-year guy because we like him. And
we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do that. So, but yeah, no, I think there was a disconnect between Shanahan and Wilks. I've never seen a head coach, throw his assistant under the bus the way that Shanahan did after that Vikings game at the presser, where he's like, yeah, he screwed up. Usually they try to cover each other a little bit more than that. He didn't in that situation. That told me that it was probably a short time, that Wilks was probably a short timer.
I think two things can be true, because, a lot of the narrative right now is Steve Wilks is fired and he's the scapegoat and he's taking the fall, and it's Shanahan like passing on blame. I think Shanahan's accepting blame, and he's firing Steve Wilks. That's how I see it, because there was something wrong with the defense. I mean, if you just look at the numbers, their run defense was horrendous this year. I mean, we're talking from 2019 to 2023. Look at the numbers here for EPA per play. 2019 they were ranked 9th. 2020 they were ranked 7th. 2021 they were ranked 2nd. 2022 they were ranked 1st. This year they're ranked 25th. I mean, that's a huge drop off. And that.
But you lost Aziz, Mosley,
right. We were talking about
Ward, Ebukam, Amenahue. I mean, they lost a bunch of good defensive run stuffers, and they acquired Hargrave, who's a pass rusher.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. You lost some players, but you're talking about going from the best in the league to one of the worst in the league. And I think there's only so many changes that happen. Yes, they lost Emmanuel. Yes, they lost, other defensive pieces, and they replaced him with Hargrave, who's not the greatest run stopper. But there was obvious signs that the front end was not tying into the back end. And something had to change, and especially after this loss where, one other thing, I know there were some reports that Kyle was taking over the game planning for the defense in the Super Bowl.
Right.
I think the funny thing about that is that the Niners defense played really well in the Super Bowl. I thought they played a vintage style of their defense where their front end was attached to their back end until the last drive of overtime, when Wilks was playing soft coverage and you see Kyle Shanahan call a timeout and start screaming on the headsets, yelling at Wilks. One thing I will say is I don't think this decision was made yesterday.
No,
I don't think that Kyle said he slept on it and then he made the decision. I would not be surprised at all if this decision was made early in the season. Like, you're not going to fire your defensive coordinator in the middle of the season, but you might start taking the reins away from him. And I think the first step of that was moving him from the booth to the field, because you're basically telling him, I don't care what you want to do. This is what you're going to do. And that was after the Minnesota game where, Wilks had a terrible call. I think you just got to move past Wilks at this point. What's done is done, but I wouldn't necessarily say that this is Shanahan's move of shifting blame off of himself onto someone else.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that are going to look at this and say, the offense was the reason that the Niners lost, and Shanahan can't blame himself, so they're going to blame Wilks. But, ultimately, while there is some blame to be going to the offense for sure, the defensive struggles. I mean, this team was built on being a dominating defense, and it wasn't a dominating defense. So, and it was starting to regress. I didn't like the fact that, they were like in the Cincinnati game, they sent some pressure at Burrow, but they played soft coverage behind it. So the coverage in the front, I just felt like for the first time in years, was not tied together at all. I mean, it's like if you're going to speed a quarterback up, the ball's coming out quick. If the ball's coming out quick and you're playing off coverage, well, all that means is that the quarterback's got to get the ball out quick, but he's got options underneath. And that's what I saw in that Cincinnati game. And I thought, oh my God, they're a mess. They're an absolute mess defensively because they were speeding up Burrow at times, but then they were not in any way stepping up and taking away the quick game underneath. So I don't know. I mean, I thought the 49er defense played with a lot of fire in this game for sure, but it doesn't bother me that Wilks is being let go. I'm not saying that it's fair to scapegoat him for all the ills that faced the 49ers, but to me, they didn't get a lot out of their defensive line. Their young linebackers never developed at all. At all. I mean, Jalen Graham, D. Winters didn't play meaningful snaps at any point. So you got these two really good young linebackers. Did they develop? If they did, I didn't see it. You got a defensive line that's super talented. They look like they underachieved. You have a number of young DBs on the back end, and guys like Womack couldn't even get on the field late in the year.
I mean, I actually think that Wilks did a good job bringing along some of the DBs. I thought, you had the best season.
Where was Luter? Where was Womack? Where was
Lenore had the best season of his career? You saw a huge step up in Lenore's play. I thought Ambry Thomas had a good season or better season than he's ever had under any 49ers defensive coach.
But then he benched Jair Brown and they got roasted. And with Logan Ryan, and then luckily they had to, call Jair Brown off the bench, and he saved their bacon in the playoffs. But I mean,
not to I don't know what the word is, like demean Steve Wilks, but he probably is a better just secondary coach. He's a secondary coach where he can coach the DBs. He's played the position. He knows the position. But I don't know how good he is as a defensive play caller. That's kind of what we've learned from Shanahan from watching the games. He's not good enough to tie in the 49ers defense the way they want to do. And it was an overambitious, decision in the first place, bringing in a coach who you're not running his scheme. So it's like what you're bringing in a coach and telling him this is what you're going to do. And then every time he tries to stray away from the plan, you're yelling at him. So he was gone. He was gone from a while ago. That's just my take on it.
Yeah. No, I think I really think that, from that KC, from the Minnesota game on, I kind of felt like Wilks was a one-time guy. And then if you are a one-year guy, the other thing about Steve Wilks is if you go look at his Wikipedia and you look at his career in a nutshell, he started coaching in 1995. It's 2024. So he's basically been doing this for almost 30 years. He's had 22 different jobs in 30 years.
Yeah.
That's a lot of moving around.
Yeah, he has a hell of a LinkedIn profile.
I'm just saying to you, it's like if you're interviewing anybody and they've been working for 30 years and they've had 22 different employers in those 30 years, do you sit there and say, yes, I love that? Or do you sit there and go, you know what? This guy tends to move around a lot. I wonder why. People everywhere in coaching always, swear about continuity and this and that. Okay, isn't this the opposite of continuity? You've had 22 different jobs in 28 years of coaching. That's a lot of turnover. So I don't know. Something told me this was not going to be a long-term thing. But interesting, yesterday they came out and said, hey, all the coaches are coming back. Today, Wilks is gone, and he's not the only one who's gone. They've lost
4 coaches that left today.
Yeah, they lost other coaches today as well.
They lost Daryl Tapp.
Daryl Tapp went to Washington to be and that's the other one. If if you really thought that Chris Kasarik was going to be the defensive coordinator, wouldn't Daryl Tapp have just stayed with the Niners? So I think that's a pretty good indication that Kasarik is not going to be the defensive coordinator, and there's not even a for sure deal that Kasarik is going to be here, period, because you heard Shanahan say, hey, we're going to do whatever is best. So I think they're going to talk to some big-time heavy hitter defensive coaches and then decide from there. Now, if you said who fits the best, probably the guy that fits the best is Jim Schwartz, who ran the wide nine. He's in Cleveland running the wide nine. Could you get Jim Schwartz to leave Cleveland and come to San Francisco? Do you want Jim Schwartz?
And you know Shanahan has a lot of respect for Jim Schwartz. I'm pretty sure Jim Schwartz is like 9-0 against Kyle Shanahan in his career.
Right, but it doesn't mean he likes him and wants him on his staff. Yeah, that's the other thing. He might think he's a prick.
Relationship with him.
Yeah, I don't know either, but it seems like Schwartz rubs some people wrong.
Hell of a defensive coach. The Cleveland Browns this year were fantastic defensively.